Owls in the Family, Chapter 11. The last chapter. I promise. The spring when Weeps and Wool became 3 years old was a very sad spring for me. My father had taken a new job, so we had to leave Saskatoon, and we had to go east to the big Ontario city of Toronto. There would be no more sloughs, no gophers, no bluffs, and worst of all, no prairies in Toronto. I hated the idea of moving, but most of all, I hated leaving my friends behind. Both my human friends and my animal friends. We couldn't take Weeps and Wool because they would have had to spend all their days locked up in a cage, and that would have been cruel. On the other hand, we couldn't just turn them loose either because they had been members of a human family for so long that they wouldn't have been able to look out for themselves. All we could do was try to find someone who would give them a new home. I talked to most of my chums about this, and they all said they were willing to take my owls, but their parents wouldn't hear of it. Then one day I thought of Bruce. He and his family had moved away from Saskatoon a while earlier and were running a fox farm about 200 miles to the northwest. I sat down and wrote Bruce a letter, and a few days later I got this reply. Dear Billy, it is pretty good here. There are lots of ducks, and we have started the fox farm, and we got lots of puppies. Dad says, sure, I can have the owls. We have an old fox pen I'm fixing up to keep them, and I'm building a wood house in it to keep them warm. Rex is healthy and says hello to Mutt, and says bring Mutt up here for a visit when you come with the owls. There are lots of Indians here, and I go to school with a lot of real Indian kids. When you come, I will take you there, and you can ride some of their horses. So long, your old pal, Bruce. I showed the letter to my father. Sounds fine to me, Billy. What do you say we drive the owls up to Bruce's place on Friday afternoon and stay over for a visit until Sunday night? I said, yes, of course, and that is what we did. It was a wonderful trip to Bruce's. The sloughs were full of water, and the water was covered with ducks resting on their way north. We saw prairie chickens dancing on the side of the road, and there were more meadow larks and red-tailed hawks than you could shake a stick at. The owls rode with me and Mutt in the rumble seat, and they had a wonderful time. When we got to the farm, Bruce's mother had a big feed ready for us. On Saturday, Bruce took me to the Indian reservation to meet his friends. One of them was a boy about my age named Harry Wildhawk. He loaned me a horse to ride. There they are, riding the horses on the prairie. And the three of us rode all over the old prairie that day, chasing coyotes and jackrabbits on horseback. On Sunday, Bruce and I stayed around the farm, and I helped him finish the cage where Wool and Weeps would sleep at night. That was a sad business, though. I kept wishing that Saturday would have gone on forever. Wool and Weeps didn't seem to suspect anything. I think they were having too much fun to be suspicious. Wool went off and explored the big poplar bluffs behind the fox farm, and then he walked all around among the fox cages, hooting at the foxes and daring them to start something. Weeps found his way to the meat house, where the fox food was ground up in a big mincing machine, and the hired man fed Weeps so many scraps that he could hardly walk at all. Sunday night, we put the two owls in their new cage. Weeps was asleep almost before I could turn the catch on the door, but all of a sudden, Wool seemed to sense that something was wrong. He gave a funny sort of hoot, and then he jumped over to the door and put his head against the wire mesh. I reached down and tickled him behind his horns, and for a minute he seemed to think things were all right again. He climbed back up to the perch and fluffed out his feathers for the night. I said, goodbye, old owls. You look after each other, and someday, maybe, I'll be back. Sad. He had to leave his owls, but at least he left him with his best friend. And he had to move to the city, so he couldn't take his owls with him. Ugh. Here's a note from the author. Were Wool and Weeps real owls? Of course they were. And Mutt and Rex and Murray and Bruce and I were all real. And if you should happen to be going to Saskatoon in the spring of the year, and if you should happen to take a walk across the prairie, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if you happen to meet some of us. And if it's a big white owl and not so big brown owl you meet, give them all my love, will you? This is the story of the author's life when he was a little boy. And he really did have two pet owls. So it was a true story that you just read, even though it was considered fiction. Okay, now's your chance. Take an AR quiz. Try for 75% or higher. I'll be checking your scores next week. Have a great weekend.